Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm Caroline Marcus, filling in for Peter Credlin. Here's what's coming up on the program. Another day, another hate preacher. A Sydney cleric filmed calling Jews monsters and rats. What will it take for the government to intervene? I'll talk to Senator James Patterson in a few moments. Plus, the outrageous hypocrisy from the Feminist movement following the New York Times investigation into sexual violence by Hamas on October 7. Brendan O'Neill joins me live from London. And a space expert previews NASA's plans to fly back to the moon, a daring mission to study black holes, and an historic rocket launch preparing for liftoff right here in Australia. But first, Sky News can reveal Qantas is counselling cabin crew who were on board a flight from Melbourne who served passengers while wearing badges of the Palestinian flag. One passenger who took these photographs of a stewardess told me all the staff he saw on board the Qantas-linked flight to Hobart on December 20 were wearing the badges. The young man, who is not Jewish, says he felt intimidated by the stunt, given the extremism and aggressiveness of some pro-Palestinian protesters in recent months. The incident has led to the head of one Jewish community group calling for all staff involved to be sacked. Australian Jewish Association CEO Robert Gregory told Sky News political activism does not belong in airplanes while Australians are heading off to enjoy their holidays. All Australians should feel safe while flying. If employees are found to be using their roles for political activism while passengers are essentially captive in the air, they should be dismissed. These incidents aren't isolated, and Qantas management should address the divisive political activism coming from their staff. Mr. Gregory is right that this is far from an isolated incident for the Qantas group. Sky News has also spoken today to another passenger who was flying on its budget airline Jetstar from Melbourne to Ballina in northern New South Wales in December, when she claims she heard a cabin crew member say "Free Palestine" at the end of the takeoff announcement on the PA system. The Jewish passenger says she was furious and made a complaint with the company straight away. It's understood that Jetstar investigated the complaint and believed it was a case of misunderstanding or mishearing. Then there's Brisbane woman Karine Khalif, who was flying back from Israel in late November when a Qantas check-in employee asked her, "Could you hear the bombs your government is dropping? And it's terrible what your government is doing." The Jewish woman, who had friends who were killed in the October 7 attack, was shocked and filed a complaint with Qantas. Qantas Group's budget airline Jetstar also fielded a complaint after a Sydney man wearing a traditional kippah on a flight from Melbourne in December said he was harassed by a fellow passenger who repeatedly yelled "Free Palestine" and "Stop killing our babies" at him. When he tried to raise the issue with a flight attendant, he was allegedly told, "Flight's over, everyone off the plane." And back in 2021, I revealed on Sky News that Qantas launched an investigation after its website listed certain locations within Israel as the state of Palestine and occupied Palestinian territory. The airline then blamed a third-party supplier and said the terms did not reflect Qantas's position on Israel and Palestine, and we of course align with the Australian government's policy. Well, the Albanese government has since hardened Labor's position on Israel, declaring the West Bank and Gaza as occupied Palestinian territories. But that was certainly not the case then, and there remains, of course, no state of Palestine. On this latest incident, a Qantas spokesperson told us cabin crew are not allowed to wear any badges unless they are part of the approved uniform policy. Every customer should feel safe and respected when flying on a Qantas aircraft. It's understood that the crew members involved will be reminded of the policy. The antics also appear, though, to breach the group's code of conduct, which states, while personnel have an individual right to support political campaigns in their own time, they must ensure that their association cannot be construed as being connected with the Qantas group. The The code also says Qantas is committed to providing a workplace that is safe, inclusive, respectful, and where all our people feel they belong. It begs the question, would the wearing of Palestinian flags make a Jewish employee feel safe and included after the worst massacre on their people since the Holocaust that started this war? Of course, you don't have to shell out for an overpriced airfare to be bombarded with pro-Palestinian activism. Just hop on public transport. In December, a Sydney train driver was recorded repeating a genocidal Hamas chant, widely recognised as a call for the elimination of the Jewish state, over the train's loudspeaker.
Thank you for riding with Sydney trains, and remember, from the river to the sea.
And in October, transport officials held a meeting with another Sydney train driver who played a pro-Palestine song on the loudspeaker of a packed train that was headed to the city on the same day as a pro-Palestine rally. He said, "We love you all. Here's a song for you guys," he told the protesters on board the train. The more cultured among us can now expect a night at the theatre to be hijacked by activists, as the opening night of the Sydney Theatre Company's performance of The Seagull was in November. We've learned even a family Christmas carols event isn't safe, as we saw in Melbourne. Under its former CEO, Alan Joyce, the Flying Kangaroo has had mixed success on political activism, campaigning on everything from same-sex marriage to the Indigenous voice. Its staff would be wise to stay out of complex and divisive Middle East politics. And I'll be speaking to the passenger on board that flight a little later in the program. Well, a little more on this conflict and the simultaneously depressing and infuriating response we've seen at home. I spoke in my editorial on Friday about the groundbreaking New York Times investigation that revealed new details about mass rapes and mutilation of women and girls that took place in Israel during the massacre on October 7. The 2-month investigation involves speaking to more than 150 people, including eyewitnesses, first responders, and rape counsellors. I speculated then that the usual deniers and apologists who parade as activists and feminists these days would not be deterred by yet more incontrovertible evidence of sexual violence. Annoyingly, that prediction would prove to be true. Feminist Clementine Ford, who's taken a break from her man-hating routine online to attack, bully, and dox Jewish women, wrote on Instagram of the Times piece, "It is monstrous to suggest that demanding critical analysis of unproven claims used to justify a genocide is somehow endorsing those claims, but here we are." Ford has, in a startlingly short amount of time, gone from someone who has argued everyone should be invested in protecting everyone from sexual violence and false reports of rape are extremely rare, to someone who now wants due process, but only when it involves Jews. It's a significant shift from what has been her position on due process for close to a decade.
It's very important, this word allegedly. You'll speak to people who don't believe that rape culture exists, and you'll speak to people who don't believe that men can ever be charged with rape because, of course, women are always lying. Very, very intent on protecting the due process of the legal system, only in cases of sexual assault where they remind you consistently that this just happened allegedly.
And then there's Antoinette Lattouf, the activist journalist who was dropped by the ABC over her pro-Palestinian social media posts. She posted on Instagram after the Times investigation, "Victims of sexual assault need to be heard and believed. At the same time, war propaganda needs to be scrutinised, especially when these rapes are being weaponised to justify the ongoing murder of innocent Palestinians." New York Times reporters, a publication that's hardly can be described as pro-Israel, now being referred to as propagandists. Incredible. The hypocrisy of these influencer activists is breathtaking. a level of scrutiny and critical analysis that would appear to be reserved just for Jewish women and girls because some of the victims were children. Welcome to the Orwellian world we live in. Rapes are war propaganda, a defensive war against a genocidal enemy in which the utmost care to minimise civilian deaths at the cost to Israel's own soldiers is reframed as itself a genocide. Ladies, better check your latest selfies. Your hypocrisy and bigotry is showing. Well, footage has emerged of yet another radical Islamic hate preacher and a warning some of what he said is offensive. Sydney cleric Ahmed Zood gave a 35-minute sermon at a mosque in Sydney's southwest on December 22, in which he called Jews monsters and thirsty for bloodshed, and described how they ran like rats from Hamas terrorists on October 7.
أهم صفة من صفات اليهود هي أنهم شعب متعطش لسفك الدماء، شعب يحب سفك الدم، فهم يربون أولادهم منذ الصغر وينشئونهم على الإرهاب، على العنف، على القتل. كان هؤلاء الجبناء يتساقطون أمام ضربات المجاهدين ويفيقون منهم كالجرذان.
Joining me now is Shadow Home Affairs and Cybersecurity spokesman James Patterson. James, thank you for joining me. It's starting to feel a bit like Groundhog Day, the amount of times we've discussed hate preachers here in Australia. We've already seen government authorities fail to act on prior hate preaching. What do you think it will take for them to finally do something?
I honestly wonder, Caroline, what it will take, how bad it has to get, how overt the incitement has to be before our state and federal governments will use the extensive anti-vilification, anti-incitement, anti-harassment laws that have been passed in recent decades at the state and federal level, which were put in place with exactly these scenarios in mind, with exactly this purpose in mind. I mean, let's step back and think about this preaching and this cleric. What is the purpose of delivering a sermon like that to a congregation? What is the reason that you would engage in that? Well, I'm greatly concerned that the purpose of it is to incite people to commit an act of violence. I'm deeply concerned that that will be the result of it, whether that's the intention or not. And why should we tolerate this kind of incitement to violence in our country? Is it going to make our country stronger? Is it going to make us more pluralistic? Is it going to make us more tolerant? Or is it going to divide us? And frankly, the way in which the Albanese government has stood by and watched while this happened, while taking no action at all, is a great stain on them.
And I know it's deeply concerning for the Jewish community and many others, of course, too. But moving overseas now, there has been a major escalation in the Israel-Hamas conflict overnight after Hamas's deputy leader was killed in an airstrike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. James, your response?
Well, this is yet more evidence why, of course, Australians should not travel to Lebanon at all, and they particularly should not be in southern Lebanon, which is an area of conflict between the listed terrorist organisation Hezbollah and the IDF, who are responding to their rocket attacks over the border. And it's yet more evidence why the Albanese government needs to consider instituting a declared area in southern Lebanon, which would make it an offence for an Australian without a proper reason to be there, and it would act as a disincentive. We already have at least one Australian who's been claimed by Hezbollah as a fighter, and another Australian who visited them who were killed in an IDF attack. I don't want to see any more Australians killed there, and I don't want to see any more Australians radicalised and equipped with the skills of terrorism in southern Lebanon fighting with Hezbollah. Frankly, there needs to be much more action from the government on this. But unfortunately, our Minister for Home Affairs, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, they are all missing in action.
Well, the government has so far resisted those calls to declare parts of Lebanon a no-go zone, as you argue that they should. Do you think they've now missed their chance, given this latest escalation?
There's still time. I mean, I fear that the conflict in southern Lebanon and northern Israel could get much, much worse. We all know that the capacity of Hezbollah to launch much broader and wider attacks on Israel and Israel's capacity to respond to that would be utterly devastating for the people of the region. And so any Australian who is still there must leave, and no Australian should contemplate going there. But we shouldn't leave it to chance, and we shouldn't rely on a DFAT travel advice alone. We should put some teeth behind it and say it's a crime to be in this area unless you have a lawful exemption to be there. That's why I think the Albanese government still has time to act, but I don't want to see them delay any longer before this becomes a full-blown war.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on what they do there and see if they listen to your wise caution. But turning to other news now, it was revealed yesterday that 2 more of the detainees who were freed following that controversial High Court ruling have been rearrested, bringing the total number to 7. James, I'm sure the government was hoping it could just sweep this one under the rug, but clearly this issue isn't going anywhere. How do you think they need to deal with this?
Well, Caroline, the day after the High Court handed down its ruling on indefinite detention, I went on television and I advised the Albanese government to urgently pass a preventative detention regime so that the most highest risk of these 150-odd people who are going to be released could be re-detained and the community could be protected. Now, for weeks they resisted, but eventually they acknowledged that that was the best course of action to protect the community, and the Parliament rushed through these laws to protect the community. Well, guess how many times the Albanese government has used this special preventative detention regime since then? 0. 0 times they've used these special new powers that were supposed to protect the community. What I want to know is, what are they waiting for? How bad does it have to get? How many crimes do these re-released detainees have to commit before they actually use the powers the Parliament gave them to protect the community and get the hardened criminals among them off the streets where they can't do any harm to the Australian community?
Well, it's been 7 in just a matter of a few weeks. We'll see how many more there has to be before they listen. Victoria's court system has become the latest victim of a cyber attack, with hackers potentially getting hold of sensitive information from hundreds of court cases. James, this is just the latest in a string of ransomware attacks in the past year or so. The St Vincent's Health Network was hacked. Yakult shortly after that. We spoke about some of those cases last week, and of course the Medicare attack earlier in the year, and Optus the year before. Do we just need to accept that none of our information is safe online?
We shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't accept that from big companies, and we especially shouldn't accept that from government entities who have a special obligation to protect the sensitive data that they hold on our behalf. This looks like a very serious cyber attack, not because of the number of people affected, but because of the nature of the information that they held. I mean, these are courts that hold suppressed hearings. These are courts that hear evidence from people with protected identities. And these are courts that hear cases, for example, involving gangland violence, serious organised crime, drug trafficking, murders and other serious offences. And many of the people who testify do so on the understanding and the promise that their identity will be protected. So it is a shocking thing if the Victorian court system has failed those people, but it is even worse that it doesn't appear to be on the federal government's radar. They should be stepping in to assist here to get to the bottom of this and find out what has been stolen, who has taken it, where it is, and what we can do to protect those witnesses who testified in good faith and hoping that they will be protected. But frankly, again, we say, where is the Cybersecurity Minister? We have an acting Cybersecurity Minister. We have an acting National Coordinator on Cybersecurity. It seems that people who are actually paid to do these jobs are too busy to be focused on these really critical issues.
Yeah, you're right. The very nature of this information, which has been compromised in itself, is just so much more concerning than perhaps even previous hacks. But before I let you go, Anthony Albanese gave his first press conference of the year this morning, vowing to make cost of living relief his government's priority in 2024. James, I guess better late than never, but there wasn't a lot of detail there. How confident are you that the Prime Minister will actually follow through on this promise?
Well, it's only taken the Prime Minister nearly 2 years to work out that the number one priority for the Australian people is cost of living. He spent his first 18 months as Prime Minister utterly obsessed with dividing our country through The Voice, and he spent $500 million of taxpayers' money on that. He's now realised maybe that wasn't such a great idea, but all he's doing is asking the Department of the Treasury and the Department of Finance to come up with some ideas for cost of living. He doesn't have any ideas of his own. He's not ready to introduce any schemes to alleviate the financial pressure that Australians are under. He just thinks they should continue to suffer before he comes up with a plan to deal with it. I mean, this just shows how distracted this government has been, how its priorities are wrong, and how the Prime Minister in particular has become just so out of touch since he got elected. He seems to be much more focused on his international travel, on the VIP flights, on going to the tennis and going to the cricket and things like that, rather than the core issues that Australians elected him to deal with.
Senator James Paterson, thank you. Always a pleasure to chat to you. We're going to take a quick break now, but next I'll have more on that exclusive story about Qantas staff wearing Palestinian flags. We'll speak to the passenger who took the photos. Plus, why London's New Year's Eve celebrations are being slammed as woke, and can Harry and Meghan recover from their horrible year in 2024? Welcome back. Back to our top story now, and Sky News can reveal Qantas staff will be cancelled by the airline after some cabin crew wore Palestinian flag badges on a recent flight from Melbourne to Hobart. The airline says the badges breached their uniform policy. Joining me now from Hobart is the passenger who took the photographs, Harrison Grafenakis. Harrison, thanks for coming on the show. Start off by telling us what you saw on that flight.
Thank you so much, Caroline. When I got on that flight, I was expecting to fly from Melbourne to Hobart, and instead I saw a bunch of staff working for Qantas. They were all wearing Palestinian flags. They say that it's not allowed, but Qantas have a history of doing this. They've done this time and time again, as we've already seen. And it's so disappointing to see a major Australian airline carrier that receives so much government money getting so involved in politics time and time again. It's not the first time they've done it. It's just so disappointing.
Well, certainly I spoke in the editorial about some of the other examples of political activism. This is the first time I've come across or seen reported any cases of staff wearing these badges. How did seeing those flag badges make you feel as a passenger? Intimidated.
I mean, in Melbourne, every single day we saw, countless Palestinian protests going through the city, and they were quite intimidating. They're loud, they were aggressive, and it was similar. Getting onto the Qantas flight and seeing a bunch of the staff wearing it, it's not something I wanted to see. When someone boards a flight, they want to go from point A to point B, not be indoctrinated with politics.
According to a Qantas spokesman, they said every customer should feel safe and respected when flying on a Qantas aircraft. Did you feel safe and respected as a passenger?
I didn't feel particularly safe, especially when they're doing political activism instead of their jobs. They should be focusing on their jobs, which was poor service to say the least, and not focusing on political activism.
You're not Jewish or Israeli. I think it's important to make that point. Why did the badges make you feel uncomfortable?
I'm Greek, so not Jewish at all.
Well, I probably didn't hear me, but why did the badges make you feel uncomfortable, given you're not of a Jewish or Israeli background?
Jihadism is not just from Palestinians. You can see it time and time again, and it's not something that companies should be importing to Australia, such as how they were saying State of Palestine on the Qantas website for going from point A to point B. It's not necessary. You don't know what they could do next. You don't know what could happen next.
Qantas says the badges breach its uniform policy, and we understand the staff involved will be spoken to and reminded of this policy. But what do you think of the airline's response? Do you think that's adequate?
I don't think it's adequate, and I don't think it goes far enough. I think that Qantas must sack the staff that did it and need to see if there's any other staff that have been doing political activism while on paid working hours. And they need to really have a good long look at that.
Well, certainly that is the position of at least one Jewish group that we spoke to today, also calling for those staff to be sacked. Thank you so much, Harrison, for bringing us this story and for chatting us tonight. Really appreciate your time. My next guest is Brendan O'Neill, the Chief Political Reporter for Spiked Online. Brendan, thank you for joining us. I spoke a little earlier in the program about the hypocrisy of the feminist movement in the aftermath of that groundbreaking New York Times investigation into sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas on October 7. Here in Australia, we've seen high-profile feminists and activists suddenly change their positions on rape complaints and due process. It appears only when it comes to Jewish victims. What's been your response to the fallout of this piece?
I just think the response to the New York Times piece has been horrific and at the same time not particularly surprising. The way in which feminists and others on the left completely abandoned the women of Israel after they were raped, butchered, burnt alive by the fascists of Hamas. The way they abandoned them was just disgusting. Let's remind ourselves that it took UN Women 57 days to make a comment about Hamas's sexual violence. And lots of other people, feminists who have spent the past 5 years saying believe women, believe all women, are now saying don't believe women. In fact, they're saying believe men. Even worse than that, they're saying believe the fascists of Hamas when they say they didn't rape women, rather than believe in the women who said that they witnessed, raped, or were themselves sexually violated. So we are witnessing the collapse of any claim to moral authority that Western feminists might once have had, and any claim to moral authority that the Western left once had. We now know that their principles, their so-called principles, do not apply to Jewish people, which, if you ask me, smacks of racism.
I would have to agree with you as a Jewish woman myself, but I have to say we've seen so many hints of this over the years. It doesn't surprise me, sadly, either. A little bit more on this topic, I guess. Harvard University's Claudine Gay has resigned as president after facing mounting criticism over how she responded to anti-Semitism on campus. Here's a little reminder of that.
Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign.
Context, that has to be the term of this entire conflict. Look, she's also facing plagiarism allegations, but despite all of this, Harvard continued to throw their support behind her, saying they accepted her resignation with sorrow. The statement reads, while President Gay has acknowledged missteps and has taken responsibility for them, it is also true that she has shown remarkable resilience in the face of deeply personal and sustained attacks. While some of this has played out in the public domain, much of it has taken the form of repugnant and, in some cases, racist vitriol directed at her through disgraceful emails and phone calls. We condemn such attacks in the strongest possible terms. Brendan, she's still being painted as a victim.
It's just awful. Of course, if she has received any personal racist abuse from people, that's terrible. We can all agree that that's terrible. But to blame her downfall on racism is completely ridiculous. Her downfall is down to the fact that she committed the cardinal sin of academia, which is plagiarism. There were almost 50 instances where she appears to have plagiarized other people. And also, as you've just shown, that congressional hearing where she just completely failed to make the case for keeping Jewish students safe on campus. That was really an indictment of her leadership. The idea that Claudine Gay is a free speech warrior to such an extent that she would defend the right of people to call for a Holocaust of the Jews is a complete fantasy. This is a woman who has been involved in cases of cancel culture, who has tried to get people cancelled for their views. Harvard University, under her leadership, came last in a free speech university rankings in America. It came last in the list. Universities in America are overrun with woke censorship. If you call a trans woman a man, you'll be cancelled. If you criticize any aspect of the Black Lives Matter ideology, you'll be cancelled. And yet, if you call for the destruction of every Jewish person on earth, apparently that's a free speech issue. That's something you're allowed to do. Once again, we can see the absolutely staggering double standards of the so-called principled moral left. And again, it's hard to explain it without using the words anti-Semitism and without wondering whether there's a racist element to this.
I've never seen such a commitment of free speech by these types before all of this. But look, speaking of wokery, let's talk about New Year's Eve, because we had our own controversy here in Sydney after our national broadcaster was criticised for politicising its fireworks coverage with an Indigenous rap performance. But it seems there was a similar experience in London.
Oh, it was terrible. We had Sadiq Khan, the mayor of woke, London's kind of pipsqueak dictator, as some of us like to refer to him. He turned the fireworks display into basically a moral lecture to the city and to the whole nation, really. There were huge voiceovers from the sky, like the gods of woke thundering down on the little people, telling us about the wonders of immigration, the wonders of gay marriage, how brilliant the National Health Service is, how great it is to be a diverse city. It was just this hectoring lecture to the little people when we wanted to just celebrate the new year. And what it really showed to me is just how ubiquitous wokeness has become. There really is no escaping this. Even, adverts on TV, movies, the education system, politics, and now even the fireworks display on New Year's Eve. Everything has to come wrapped up in this woke ideology. I think people are getting sick of being constantly beaten over the head with this ideology, and we just want a few days off from being lectured to by people like Sadiq Khan.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? A little break from it all, but they just can't let it happen. Now, I can't let you go without talking about Harry and Meghan. 2023 was a bit of a shocker for the couple, to say the least. There was, of course, Prince Harry's memoir and the Netflix documentary, among so many other examples. What do you think 2024 will bring for the couple?
Well, it's hard to tell, but, lots of people are saying that 2023 seemed to be their annus horribilis, to use a phrase that the Queen once used. And I think that's right. They had some success. The Netflix documentary did okay. Harry won part of his legal trial against the press here, which I think is a very worrying attack on freedom of the press. But their podcast has bombed, and Harry's book shocked a lot of people with the way in which it reveals so much about the private life of Prince William and King Charles and Camilla and lots of other people. I think people are sick and tired of this whining celebrity couple from California. We are going through a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis. There are wars taking place. The last thing we need to hear is this woe is me act from literal royals who live it up in mansions in California. People are sick of their whining, their narcissism, their self-pity. What we want from royals is a bit of, public duty, a sense of loyalty, a sense of respect for the country. And we've never got that from Harry and Meghan.
You're so right. But we are not sick of sending them up here on this program. Thank you so much, Brendan O'Neill. Appreciate your time. After the break, as the Israel-Hamas war makes its way to Lebanon and the Red Sea fighting escalates, could we be facing a wider Middle East conflict, and will Australia need to get involved? That's all next with my brilliant panel, Michael Danby and Kosha Gada. Welcome back. Tensions are intensifying in the Israel-Hamas conflict after Hamas's deputy leader was killed in an airstrike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. Israel is yet to claim responsibility, but the attack has sent shockwaves through the Middle East, while Hamas has put an immediate halt on weeks-long hostage negotiations. Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah group has warned of retaliation attacks on Israel, saying in a statement, this crime will not go unanswered or unpunished. Joining me now is former Labor MP Michael Danby and Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Welcome to both of you. Kosha, this is a concerning escalation.
It is great to be with you again, Caroline. These are always concerning escalations. It's a reminder that the tentacles of conflict run wide, run deep, and are unpredictable. However, in this case, given that the target that was taken out was actually a military commander, the second in command of Hamas, a terrorist organization, I think even where you see a lot of people where the nuance pops in and certain people have been critical of the extent or the approach in which Israel has been defending itself, when it comes to this one, I think there is generally coalescence because this wasn't going after civilians. It was going after a very damaging person at the leadership of that organization. And those people do sit and take harbor in other nations. That makes it complicated because you are technically entering other sovereign territory, but I think that's the nature of these terrorist organizations, and we can expect and understand why Israel would continue in this mission as they should.
Michael, how significant do you think this death is, and the claims that it might impact on hostage negotiations as well?
Well, it'll set back hostage negotiations temporarily. What did they expect after raping and murdering and torturing? This won't be the last, Caroline. Go and have a look at the film, your viewers, Munich, and you'll see what the whirlwind that these people have unleashed in the future. After the war is over, I wouldn't like to be a Hamas political or military leader living anywhere in the world. You better hide like Sheikh Nasrallah in the vault of the Banque Nationale de Paris, the only safe place.
Well, look, so much more disturbing stories to talk to you both about. Footage has emerged of yet another radical Islamic hate preacher calling Jews monsters and rats in a sermon in Sydney last month. Here's that video again.
يربون أولادهم منذ الصغر وينشئونهم على الإرهاب، على العنف، على القتل. كان هؤلاء الجبناء يتساقطون أمام ضربات المجاهدين ويفيقون منهم كالجرذان.
Michael, I mean, it went on and on. It's a 35-minute rant, but as a member of the Jewish community, what are your thoughts on this? And do you think the Labor government now needs to intervene? They haven't up until now.
I can't understand it, Caroline. Why don't they speak up and say something? Where's Claire O'Neill? Where's the woman Credlin, who's the New South Wales Police Minister? They should be giving some ethical leadership and saying this kind of speech inciting people to violence is not on in Australia. And not just as a member of the Jewish community, I think the average Australian thinks these people are loonies and wonders why the government just lets them rant and rant and rant. Do we have to wait till someone is killed? I mean, it's just beyond all of the left liberals like me included used to argue for 18C of the Human Rights Act. Oh, where's the government in enforcing its own laws? This kind of language is really beyond the pale in tolerant, surfing, race-going, football-going Australia.
It's disappointing, the lack of action, and you're right, it shouldn't just be Jews who should be concerned about this and are concerned. And I revealed a hate preacher yesterday who spoke out against Christians as well, so it affects most of us. But let's move on now to the situation in the Red Sea where tensions are escalating. Iran has reportedly now sent a warship into the Red Sea after the US Navy destroyed 3 Houthi boats. Kosha, do you think that this crisis could be leading to a wider Middle East conflict involving the US?
It appears that certainly not an unlikely scenario. And, as we just discussed, the tentacles of war are unpredictable and you just never know how they're going to twist and turn. The situation this highlights is there's obviously a military issue and a security issue, but then there's also an economic issue because of the importance of that lane of traffic in the shipping industry. The Red Sea is very, very critical. It's a large percentage of European shipments, but also globally. And so you're already seeing prices increase because of this. You're going to see supply chains reshift. And so I think more of a defensive tack, similar to what the U.S. just did, you might see that sort of amping up the ability for applying defensive force to that part of the world, at least as it relates to shipping. But again, the minute these escalations continue, we just have to be prepared for even things we can't imagine right now.
And Michael, Kosha just mentioned the rising prices, the costs of fuel and so on. It's not just our sovereignty being impacted here, and we are being told that other costs are going to go up, like those petrol prices. Do you think Australia needs to get more involved in this effort in the Red Sea?
You bet you I do. I think Greg Sheridan, the foreign editor, is right when he accuses this current government of choosing the bludgers option. How can we ask the Americans to shave off 3 of their Virginia-class nuclear submarines from a program that they don't have enough of their own, and at the same time not send them one rotten ship? To sort of sit on the flank of some operation to keep peace for 15% of international trade. I mean, all of the major German and Dutch shipping companies have now cancelled trade through the Red Sea. That affects Australia. Petrol prices. I mean, it's very nice to say we have a South Pacific concentration, but doesn't the economy count? It's terrible that Australia hasn't stepped up and stood by the Yanks. I do agree with General Jack Keane, the Fox strategist, though, that American concentration on just defensive measures is empowering the Iranians, and it may come a time to hit the Houthi bases or to sink that ship in the Iranian ship in the Red Sea, because you've got to hit the head of the monster. You've got to escalate to stop it. Not to start a war, but to give the Iranians a signal so far and no further. They are going to keep pushing, and the next thing they might do is test a nuclear weapon.
Oh, God forbid. But let's move on to another war now, a much older one. Anthony Albanese has demanded the release of the missing documents containing details of the Iraq war. The documents were made public from the National Archive on January 1 after the 20-year secrecy period expired, but they went missing before they could be released to the public. The Prime Minister has now launched an independent review to find the documents.
Australians have a right to know the basis upon which Australia went to war in Iraq. My government believes that this mistake must be corrected, that the National Archives of Australia should release all the documentation.
Are you concerned that there's been a cover-up here?
Well, that's why we have asked Dennis Richardson to do the review.
Kosher, your thoughts on this?
You know, I think as a broader point, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I do think more of these things should be in the public domain, not less. Having said that, I think the current administration, more cynical observer, might say they're not exactly paragons, probably, of releasing things into the public domain. I know they've dodged and fought other Freedom of Information Act requests and so on. So I'm sure there's a political side to this as well. There's no question about that. Spoiler alert, I would say that, you know, even when these documents are recovered and released, one of the largest driving factors for Australia's involvement was that it is within the sphere of influence of the US. The US wanted to go in, and that was probably, that's going to be in the answer, but maybe there's other details that he wants out there.
I dare say you could be on the money with that spoiler alert. Now, look, households could be in for yet another power price hike, with energy retailers demanding consumers pay a higher default electricity bill due to surging solar tariff costs. Michael, once again, renewables proving they may not be the cheapest option.
No, and we keep paying our Chinese friends to secure all the cobalt and lithium, and gee, I hope that some Australian companies intervene in the market in West Australia and Tasmania and see that it's not all being produced by them. I think unrealistic views about the transition to renewables is a mistake. It's a good idea. We're all against pollution, but we should do it slower so that it doesn't cost the average person. And I want to tell our State Minister here for the environment, all of her ethnic communities don't want you to take away their gas cooker. They find it much easier to prepare their food and much fresher. And I bet your Lily D'Ambrosio, your family did too. Don't take away our gas cookers.
Yeah, that war on gas, it just doesn't seem to end. Now, look, let's move to the US, where Donald Trump's campaign is appealing a Maine court's decision to remove him from the presidential ballot after it ruled that he incited the Jan 6 Capitol riots and is therefore ineligible. Kosher, do you think Trump's chances are in trouble if he can't get these decisions overturned?
No. It depends, I guess, what your definition of in trouble is. I would say no, because it's not making a difference at all politically. With every indictment, he seems to go 5 points up in the polls. And the reason for that is because everybody sees this as lawfare, which is using the legal system and the justice system as a way to interfere in the election. The second thing is legally, it doesn't really make sense. Everybody expects that the Supreme Court will overturn this. They know that. It's on very shaky legal grounds. However, the whole calculus, I think, is about there's a swath of the electorate that will find it a little bit too much and will find him a little bit just untouchable if he's been convicted or, has had to go through these legal battles. And that's what I think the other side's strategy is pinning their hopes on, those suburban moms and those independents. Is there enough of them that will find him a little bit too much after this? And that's, I think, the high stakes gamble here.
Yeah, big gamble indeed. Okay, thank you so much, Michael Danby and Kosher Gada, for your time. Well, coming up after the break, we talk to a space expert about a fresh mission to study black holes, plus NASA's plan to send humans deeper into the solar system than they have in decades, and Australia's very first rocket launch. Welcome back to the show. Now, a bit of a change of pace. India has successfully launched its first satellite to study black holes and other celestial objects as it seeks to deepen its presence in space ahead of an ambitious crewed mission next year. Joining me now is ANU astrophysicist and cosmologist Brad Tucker. Brad, thanks so much for your time. NASA launched a similar mission in 2021 and has made some fascinating discoveries. Can you talk us through them and what this latest launch is hoping to achieve?
Yeah, this Indian satellite X-Pol, which is an X-ray polarimeter. So similar to, as you said, this NASA mission. And what it's doing is looking firstly at X-ray light from things like black holes. Black holes or anything that's really energetic emits lots of X-rays. Now, these are really hard to detect, so you have to do it from space because our Earth's atmosphere blocks it, and you need special instruments to measure this. And in the past, NASA has shown a lot of the subtle activity that happens right near the boundary of the black hole, essentially where stuff falls in, where all the gas and stuff is being swallowed up. And so this India's mission is going to look at specific black hole targets to complement that NASA mission. So essentially, it's extending what's already been doing with NASA to more targets, a larger part of the universe, and in a complementary way. And everywhere we look at India, they're doing a lot of these things that are second or third or fourth on the list between the likes of the US, China, and Russia. So, we celebrated their milestone of landing on the moon last year. It really just shows how fast they're moving. And as you said, looking forward to getting their own crew into space on an Indian rocket in the coming year.
Really a major player in that space race now, but those black holes, so fascinating. The year ahead is promising some spectacular pursuits in space, but perhaps the most exciting is NASA's Artemis 2 mission to the moon. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, this is one that we've been waiting along for a while now, where this is the first sending of people around the moon. Now, Artemis 2 won't land on the moon, but it will send humans around the moon. And the idea being that it will be in the Space Launch System, NASA's rocket, in the Orion capsule. They will do essentially a 10-day journey into space, going around and coming back. And this will be the test and final mission before in 2025, they actually send humans to land on the moon. And the moon's going to be the theme of the year. We have so many countries launching missions to the moon. Japan will be landing on the moon in the next few weeks. And to support those Artemis missions, U.S. companies will be sending supplies and experiments and cargo to the moon's surface to aid in the 2025 operations of humans there. So it's going to be a huge theme in 2024, and that is all about the moon.
I love it. The moon is the place to be, it seems. I know a few people I'd like to send there myself.
Yeah.
Australia is set to make history, launching the first locally made rocket from remote Queensland. When is this due to happen, and what can we expect?
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting one, and it builds off the history. Rheosat, which was Australia's first satellite, most people don't realize Australia was the third country to build and launch a satellite from its own territory. But what Gilmore Space in Queensland is doing is they've built their own rocket. It will be launched from Australia, as you said, in Bowen in Queensland, and launching an Australian payload into space. So it's going to happen in the early part of 2024. They're finishing the infrastructure at the launch site, as you're seeing on the screen now. They're awaiting now the final approvals from the Australian Space Agency, which is essentially the safety checks for both the rocket and the rocket site. And so we can expect probably, before Easter time, I think is the hope, that we will see this huge milestone. And this may be another theme of the year. We already have groups like Equatorial Launch Australia that has set up its own launch facility to launch in 2022 NASA rockets, and is looking at other customers this year as well, plus Southern Launch in South Australia. So this could be a big year in marking Australia sending things into space and not just building them.
So exciting. Thank you, Brad Tucker, so much for explaining it so simply for us as well. That's all the time I have for tonight. Don't go anywhere. Next is the Bot Report with James McPherson.